The Punisher, the King of is a 12-issue story written by Jason Aaron and illustrated by Jesus Saiz and Paul Azaceta. This current iteration of the Punisher moves in a very specific direction. He attempts to find a resolution to his only mission, to win the war against crime, which requires some retconning and the shocking resurrection of his wife, Maria. Side note, Jason Aaron did write a Marvel Max version of the character, and Aaron did bring that series to a definitive end. So technically, he's doing it again, but for the mainstream Marvel version. That needs to be mentioned just to clear up any possible confusion. End of side note. The overall plot involves the Punisher becoming the war leader of the Hand, the ninja-based crime organization that has plagued Daredevil for years. Frank Castle now has a limitless army to attack and defeat various criminal enterprises worldwide. The subplot involves the resurrection of Frank's wife, Maria, and the attempted resurrection of their children, which is not successful. Frank's early violent years are also filled in, and we discover that the Hand has been watching Frank for a long time. They believe he is their bloody messiah and the one who will conquer everything in their name. The main organization, the one that Frank is trying to identify and eliminate, is run by Ares, the god of war. During the series, Frank is powering up with supernatural powers gifted him by the Beast, the god the Hand worship. Eventually, this leads to an all-out confrontation at the Hand's hidden complex. Ares is finally defeated, and Frank's intent pivots to dismantling the Hand, face the consequences from the superhero community, and finally end the war he's been waging for decades. The series concludes with Maria learning of her death and subsequent revival, and then shooting Frank as he comes to be with her forever. This gives the superheroes an opportunity to capture Frank, remove his powers, and then give him a kangaroo court trial and try to decide his fate. Frank removes this choice by praying to the Beast and ending his own existence on Earth. The epilogue shows Frank on Weird World, an alternate universe. He's alive and well, and shepherding children to safety. First of all, there's an interesting narrative device. The first half of the series is narrated by the woman who leads Frank into dark despair, and the latter half is narrated by the woman who epitomizes Frank's hope. These two halves are played well against one another, and they contrast the psychopathic Punisher with the human, conflicted side of Frank Castle. In a way, this expresses the split in Frank's personality. One's a devil whispering dark promises, the other is an angel that shines a light to lead Frank home. It's a nice touch. Thematically, it makes sense that Ares, the god of war, would be the primary antagonist. After all, Frank characterizes his bloody crusade as a war, and, for the purposes of this series, he's attempting to bring that war to a close. It's logical that the god of war, who thrives on it continuing indefinitely, would not be pleased about it ending. Not to mention, he considers the Punisher to be his greatest disciple. The use of two very different artists to illustrate the past and the present was a perfect method to tell the two different but related stories. This is one of those elements that is rather unique to the medium and impossible to replicate in others. As a storytelling technique, it worked perfectly. And the color artist, Dave Stewart, did a phenomenal job adapting his palette to the two different styles. Visually, it's amazing. With all that said, it's somewhat easy to see why this may be an off-putting story for die-hard Punisher fans. Whenever Frank gets supernatural powers, it dehumanizes the character. At his core, he was a regular guy who had a very bad day, and his response was to pick up a gun and do something about it. It's an origin that is identifiable and human to a certain degree. Certainly it's psychopathic, but the initial visceral response is very human. Traditionally, he becomes less interesting when he's enhanced and has an edge over ordinary criminals. Secondly, Frank joins a criminal organization. While this is explained, and there's a huge incentive for him to join, it does seem out of character. One of his defining characteristics is he's a loner with a distinct mission. He's had partners in the past, Microchip comes to mind, but he never seemed comfortable accepting help from anyone. Furthermore, commanding an army doesn't seem like his style, even though he does have a military background. But he was a grunt, not a leader. Finally, the Hand is exactly the type of organization he'd target if they got on his radar. So this is a very iffy addition. One of the most controversial elements is the large retcon that runs through the series. Well, there's a few retcons actually. The first one is Frank being a killer since the age of 10. the sense of vigilante justice turns out to be an early development in his life. Also, the Hand had been watching him from an early age, trying to determine whether he was the leader they had been waiting for. Notably, they present a young Frank with a set of 3 knives and ask if one belongs to him. This is a pretty grim twist on the Buddhist tradition of doing the same thing when they are seeking the latest incarnation of Buddha. Along the same lines, a lot is made of Frank's state of being once he returns from the Marines. Admittedly, this does seem realistic and it does make sense. The overall point being, a lot of Frank's past is developed in a direction that makes it seem like him becoming the Punisher was predetermined. It was fate. Random violent chaos didn't create him and set him on a path. He was walking that path all along. And destiny, so to speak, was merely waiting for Frank to accept his role. Again, this diminishes the fact that he was a victim that lost everything. And instead of wallowing in despair, he picked up a gun and channeled that trauma at those that caused him pain. More to this point, there are multiple scenes of the Punisher straight up unaliving groups of random people brought to him by the Hand. This illustrates he's clearly past the point of any recognizable humanity. He's completely unidentifiable to any reasonable human being, which seems to be the overall intent. The most controversial element is probably the return of Frank's wife, Maria. This brings forth a further revelation. She was about to inform Frank she wanted a divorce just before they were gunned down in the park. And, to finish off the controversy, she shoots Frank when he's done with his war. These are all shocking developments. The divorce seems a touch melodramatic, but it's ultimately a tragic addition to the mythos, and it was something that was set up in the past narrative. I mean, considering Frank's behavior and his emotional distance from his family, it's not a surprising development. All of that, to the best of my knowledge, is a retcon. Someone correct me if I'm wrong. Maria shooting Frank is odd. She justifies it as disgust that Frank would use her and their children's death to wage murder, and that does make sense on one level. It's hard to deny that someone deeply religious, like herself, would not feel honored that their memory was used to cause widespread chaos and bloodshed. But it seems like a forced action more than anything. This just doesn't seem to fit, since Maria isn't a character prone to violence. It's the one story beat that doesn't work for me personally. The other beat that is questionable is Frank praying to the Beast, and the Beast teleporting him to Weird World. Obviously, this was a way to remove Frank from the Marvel Universe without killing him off. It's, a solution to the problem, that's for sure, and it allows for him to return at some point. But it leaves a lot of unanswered questions in its wake. Not to mention, it undermines the fact that Frank was always ready to accept the consequences of his actions. He always knew that one day he'd be held accountable. Frank groveling for a way out, instead of grimly facing his own punishment, seems out of character. So let's address the elephant. Is this a terrible Punisher story? Overall, not really. Critically speaking, it is entertaining, consistent in tone, and it moves at a rather brisk pace, and the artwork is top-notch. However, there are questionable bits. The generous retcons give the Punisher a context that, in my opinion, diminishes the identifiable human traits that connect with an audience, which may be intentional, since a vigilante with a high body count that never faces any accountability is a problematic concept, especially in today's social climate. It seems possible that this trendy relic of the 70s, who was a product of popular vigilante fiction, such as the Executioner book series and films like Dirty Harry and Death Wish, was seen as projecting the wrong message in modern times. A man with a gun filled with hate and focused on brutal justice is, perhaps, not a concept a company like Disney wants to endorse. While the character still exists, albeit in a different universe, it seems that the vigilante status of the Punisher is being retired. So this is very likely an ending for the brutal anti-hero thug known as the Punisher. This may be the indirect message of the series, but that's pure speculation. Basically, if there is a Frank Castle in the future, he may very well be non-violent, or the violence will be neutered. At the very least, he'll avoid any unaliving. So, what do you all think of this run of the Punisher? Do you think he has a future in the mainstream Marvel Universe, or do you think he's permanently retired? And what about Maria? Do you think she has some role to play since she's out there driving around with a pile of cash? let me know in the comments below. All that's left to say is, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, like, comment, and all that good stuff. Additional thanks to all those that directly support this channel and help keep the lights on. I appreciate every single one of you. Thank you.